Hello everyone, this is Jason from STEM Nerds. In today's video, we are going to be talking about one of the most deadly parasites on Earth today, and that is malaria. It is a plasmodium parasite from the phylum Apicomplexa, and there are a few different species of plasmodium depending on where they are located in the world. Now, this is a eukaryotic organism. It is a protozoan, so it's a single-celled eukaryotic organism, which means it's going to have a nucleus that houses all of its DNA, but it's also going to have a few other organelles that we're used to hearing about. It's got a single mitochondrion, usually. It's going to have food vacuoles. It's going to have a cell membrane, the smooth and rough ER. It is also going to have a few specialized organelles as well. Micronemes, which are small vesicles that release adhesion molecules that are going to help it attach to the host parasite. It's going to have some dense granules that's going to help it evade the immune system. Another really important structure is the apicoplast. This is something that's involved in fatty acid synthesis and heme, and it is an essential pathway for this parasite. And it's also really important because a lot of our anti-malarial drugs that we're going to talk about later, they target these pathways. Here you can see where malaria is present. You can see here that there is a band along the equator, and this happens to be where the Anopheles mosquito is most likely to thrive. In areas where the Anopheles mosquito is not present, it's a little bit harder for malaria to actually spread. You can also see the number of cases here of malaria and how it has changed over time. And really later on in the video, we're going to talk about prevention and treatment methods. And these are critical to continuing the reduction in malaria cases that we see worldwide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of malaria. It's actually very interesting and somewhat complex because we're dealing with two organisms, the Anopheles mosquito and the human being, and you need both of these organisms in order to complete the life cycle. So it starts with the mosquito bite. When mosquitoes take a blood meal from a human being, they actually, believe it or not, inject both an anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing and a temporary anesthetic, local anesthetic, so that people don't feel the mosquito bite. How many times have you been out and you've been bitten by mosquitoes and you're like, wow, I have no idea, I didn't feel a lot of this. Well, that's because the mosquito has the ability to temporarily numb that area so that you're not feeling it. But as it's injecting these things, if it is infected with the sporozoite, which is basically the structure that's found in the mosquito, that winds up in the human blood. Now, that sporozoite is eventually going to find its way into liver cells. The sporozoites invade the liver cells, and once they're there, they begin to multiply asexually. At that point, they're called schizonts, and that can contain thousands of merozoites. The liver cells eventually rupture, and they release the merozoites into the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, the merozoites invade the red blood cells. Now, once inside the red blood cells, they will form a trophozoite, which is kind of the ring form, and then those things eventually mature, and eventually you get what's known as a schizont, which divides to form new merozoites. They are eventually released from the red blood cells, and they're released basically in big groups and in very characteristic 24 to 48 to 72 hour increments, depending on the type of infection that you have. And this is going to cause fevers and chills, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Now, what's interesting is the merozoites differentiate into the sexual forms. They're called gametocytes. There's going to be a male microgametophyte or gametocyte and a female macrogametocyte. Now, once you have an infected human, if they get bit by an uninfected female Anopheles mosquito, they are going to ingest the gametocytes. Once those gametocytes are inside the mosquito gut, the male gametocytes will produce basically a sperm-like microgamete. The females will have the macrogamete. Fertilization is going to occur in the actual mosquito and form a zygote. That zygote is going to elongate into what is known as an ookinete, which penetrates the gut wall and develops into an oocyst. And once that oocyst starts to develop, thousands of sporozoites can develop. Those sporozoites wind up in the salivary glands of the mosquito, and then we have the cycle basically repeat itself. All right, so based on all of this, how does malaria actually make people sick? What is the pathology? Well, again, the infection really begins in the liver. After the sporozoites enter the bloodstream, they quickly get to the liver, which we've already talked about. They form those merozoites, which we've also talked about, and that is going to lead to liver cells bursting and being destroyed. That's basically when the illness starts. But when it's really felt, the signs and the symptoms is once it's in the blood. So the merozoites, when they invade the red blood cells, they feed on hemoglobin, and basically that's the molecule that carries oxygen. Inside the red blood cell, they're going to grow, they're going to multiply, and eventually cause the red blood cells to rupture. They're going to do this, like I said, roughly between every 48 to 72 hours. Again, that's species dependent. But every time those red blood cells release or burst, they're going to release toxins, parasite proteins, cell debris, and that's going to cause a major immune response. And so upon the red blood cells bursting, that's going to begin that cycle of fever and chills as the immune system tries to deal with the parasite that's in the body. And so the fevers are going to spike when the parasites are released, and the chills and sweating as the body is basically trying to regulate the temperature. And so as you might imagine, as red blood cells are being destroyed, anemia can occur, lack of oxygen to the brain and to the heart, to the kidneys and all the other vital organs. That can result in extreme fatigue and weakness and shortness of breath. Often splenomegaly can occur because that is basically the spleen that is trying to remove all the damaged red blood cells that have taken place in the bloodstream. It's also not uncommon for infected red blood cells to stick to the walls of small blood vessels, and that can cause clotting issues, blockages that can prevent the flow, like I said, to the brain, the lungs, and the kidneys. And you combine that with the fact that red blood cells are already being destroyed, and that's their job. And so you can really have a severe issue that can cause cerebral malaria, organ failure, seizures, and coma. All right, so how is malaria treated? There are, again, anti-protozoal drugs, and a lot of the treatment protocols are going to be dependent on the actual species of malaria that's infected the host. So the first-line treatments for what's known as uncomplicated malaria are going to be the ACTs, artemisinin-based combination therapies, and there's a number of drugs that are going to be included in that treatment process, one of which is mefloquine. For severe malaria, especially Plasmodium falciparum, that's going to require additional treatment, often via IV. Quinine is definitely a way to go in that particular case. Also probably going to require additional fluids and electrolytes, possibly a blood transfusion if there's severe anemia due to malaria, and anticonvulsants, especially if the resultant infection has led to cerebral malaria. It's also important to prevent relapses of malaria for some of the organisms that basically go into a dormant state. Primaquine can definitely be useful in that particular case. Keep in mind there is there is a significant amount of drug resistance, especially with P. falciparum, and so that particular organism is drug resistant now to the chloroquines, which is one of the most widely used anti-malarial drugs on earth. So how is malaria prevented? Well, first thing is if you can prevent the vector, i.e. the Anopheles mosquito, from transmitting the disease from one person to another, that's going to go a long way. So insecticide-treated bed nets are really important. Indoor and outdoor spraying to kill off the mosquitoes. Obviously, that is going to have environmental repercussions, but where malaria is widespread, that might be a risk worth taking. And so you're trying to control the larva and therefore the Anopheles mosquito long term. There are preventative drugs, and so for people who are traveling to the areas where malaria is endemic, things like doxycycline, Malarone, Primaquine, and mefloquine can all be potential drugs that can be used when traveling to areas where malaria is present. There are vaccinations that have been approved now for malaria. The RTS vaccine and the R21 vaccine have both been approved, and it's showing some pretty decent results. All right, everyone, so that is malaria. I know the life cycle is rather complicated. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, have a great week.